It started with a quiet morning on a quiet farm in rural Iowa. The sun was just rising over the cornfields, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Chickens clucked in the coop, the tractor sat idle in the yard, and inside the small farmhouse kitchen, Grace Whitfield was pouring coffee, thinking about the day ahead. Her two daughters, 8-year-old Nora and 11-year-old Cora, had already grabbed their wicker basket and headed down the dirt road to the little roadside stand where they sold fresh eggs every Tuesday and Thursday. It was a simple life, honest, hardworking, and full of love. But by noon, that life would be shattered, because those two little girls never came back. No screams, no tire marks, no signs of a struggle. Just an empty basket by the side of the road, the cash box lying open with a few coins still inside, and two bicycles left, leaning against the wooden stand like they were waiting for someone who would never return. For 3 years, the Whitfield family lived in a nightmare of not knowing. Were the girls taken? Did they run away? Were they even still alive? The whole town searched. Police dogs, helicopters, flyers on every telephone, pole, nothing. And then, just when hope had almost faded completely, something strange surfaced from the depths of Cedar Creek. A man named Joe Thompson was out magnet fishing. Just a hobby, something to pass the time on a lazy summer morning. He wasn't looking for anything important, just old nails, maybe a lost tool. But when his magnet pulled up a rusted, mud-covered milk can, something felt off. It was heavy. Too heavy. And when he pried it open, what he found inside would send shockwaves through the entire county. The authorities were called. Crime scene tape went up. Detectives arrived from the state police, and when Grace and her husband Garrett got the news, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under them. The milk can had come from their farm. They used dozens of them years ago before switching to modern coolers. And now, inside that same can, wrapped in a blue tarp with yellow stripes, were the remains of a child. Small bones, tattered fabric, a pink hair tie that Grace would later identify as Nora's. Her world collapsed. She screamed. She fell to her knees. And Garrett, a man who had spent his life fixing broken tractors and patching fences, stood there, helpless, unable to fix the one thing that mattered most, his family. But here's where the story takes a turn that no one saw coming. The police didn't just come to deliver bad news. They came with a warrant. Because the milk can was from the Whitfield farm, they treated the property as a potential crime scene. Officers in white suits combed through the barn, the chicken coop, even the root cellar. They took soil samples, photographed every corner, and started asking questions that made Grace's blood run cold. Asterisk, where were you the morning the girls disappeared? Did you have any financial troubles? Were there any arguments at home? It didn't take long for the whispers to start. The parents, grieving and broken, were now suspects in their own daughter's murder. The media showed up fast, cameramen, reporters with microphones, flashing lights in the middle of their quiet farmyard. One reporter, Kelly Martinez from Channel 7, stood on their porch and asked the unthinkable asterisk, where is Cora? Are you hiding her too? The cruelty of it cut deep. These weren't criminals. They were parents who had spent every single day, for 3 years, wondering if their girls were cold, hungry, scared, and now, instead of answers, they were being blamed. But then came the neighbor, Walter Brennan. He'd lived just across the property line for over 20 years, always there when they needed help. Fixed their fence after the storm, fed the animals. When they went to visit Grace's sister, he showed up the day the police came, his face pale with shock, tears in his eyes. I can't believe this, he said, hugging Garrett like a brother. And in the days that followed, he became their rock. He fed the chickens, he checked on the horses, he even offered to store extra grain so they wouldn't have to worry about deliveries. Everyone saw him as a good man, a kind man, a friend, but Grace started noticing little things. The way he avoided looking at the photo of Nora on the mantle. The way he flinched when Cora's name came up. And then one night, while helping him load feed sacks in his barn, she saw Ito, roll of blue tarp with yellow stripes, the exact same kind used to wrap her daughter's body. Her breath caught, her heart pounded. She tried to stay calm, but her hands shook so bad she hit her head on a beam and cut herself. Walter rushed to help, wrapping her wound, apologizing, saying he didn't mean to upset her. But something in his eyes, something cold, something guarded, told her he knew exactly what she was thinking. That night, Garrett was finally asleep on the couch, exhausted from grief. But Grace couldn't rest. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. She kept thinking about the tarp, about Walter, about how close his barn was to their property. And then she remembered something else, something small, but it nagged at her. When the girls disappeared, Walter was the only neighbor who didn't join the first search party. He said he was fixing his tractor. But now, sitting in the dark kitchen, Grace wondered, what if he wasn't fixing anything at all? What if he was hiding something? She grabbed her phone, slipped out the back door, and walked toward Walter's barn. The night was still. Crickets chirped. The air was thick with summer heat. She didn't plan on confronting him. She just needed to see, to make sure she wasn't losing her mind. But when she got there, the barn light was on. She pushed the door open slowly, and inside, Walter was hunched over his workbench, tools spread out, like he was repairing something. He looked up, startled. "Grace, what are you doing here?" His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. She made up an excuse, something about borrowing the flatbed trailer for the funeral. He nodded, started talking about the hitch, the straps, the wiring, but then her eyes drifted to his jacket, tossed over a hay bale, and sticking out of the pocket, a piece of paper. A child's drawing, bright crayon colors, a little girl, in a blue dress, holding hands with a tall man. The girl was labeled Clara, the man Daddy. Grace's breath stopped. The girl looked exactly like Cora, same hair, same smile, same way of drawing hearts in the corners. And then Walter saw her looking. The change in his face was instant. The kind neighbor mask slipped. His voice dropped. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said. "You know now." Before she could react, he moved fast. A shotgun appeared in his hands. "Walk," he said. "We're going downstairs." Grace's heart screamed at her to run, but her body obeyed, because in that moment, she realized something worse than death. Her daughter wasn't gone. She was alive, and she was right here, somewhere beneath that barn, just yards from the home she'd been stolen from. But the real horror, when Grace finally saw her, Cora didn't run to her. She didn't call her mom. She backed away, terrified, and whispered one word, "Daddy," as she looked at the man who had taken everything from them. And that's when Grace understood. The monster wasn't a stranger. He was the man who brought them pie on Sundays. He was the man who waved every morning from his field. He was the one they trusted most. And now, as the sound of Garrett's voice echoed from above, calling her name, Grace knew one thing for sure: tonight wouldn't end with answers. It would end with a fight for her daughter, a fight for the truth, and maybe, a fight for her life. The moment Grace screamed those words into the night, "He has Cora," everything changed. The quiet farm, the still air, the crickets singing, like nothing was wrong, it all shattered. The barn became a battlefield. Walter lunged for the shotgun, his face twisted, no longer the kind neighbor who brought over fresh peaches every August. Garrett didn't hesitate. He threw himself at Walter like a man possessed. Like every sleepless night, every whispered prayer, every tear shed over missing posters had led to this one moment. The two men crashed into the feed bins, tools clattering to the ground, the gun swinging wildly between them. Grace was still on the stairs, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She saw the barrel point toward Garrett, then toward the ceiling, then back again. She couldn't just stand there. She threw herself into the fight, grabbing the cold metal of the shotgun, her fingers slipping on the slick surface. For a second, all three of them were tangled hands on the same weapon, breaths coming in ragged gasps, the weight of 3 years of lies and loss pressing down on that single, terrible moment. Then the gun fired. The blast echoed through the barn like thunder. Walter cried out, collapsing to the ground, clutching his leg. Blood soaked through his jeans, spreading fast. The gun clattered away. Garrett staggered back, stunned, his hands shaking. Grace didn't wait. She turned and ran back down the stairs, her legs barely holding her up, screaming Cora's name. The hidden room was exactly as she left it: soft pink walls, butterfly decals, the smell of crayons and old books. And there, in the corner, was her daughter, not the little girl who used to run barefoot through the garden, chasing chickens. This was someone older, thinner, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't run to Grace. She didn't call her mom. She just stared, like Grace was a stranger who had broken into her world. "Cora," Grace sobbed, dropping to her knees. "Baby, it's me. It's Mommy." She reached out, but Cora flinched, pressing herself into the wall. "No," she whispered. "You're not my mom. Daddy said you were bad. He said you hurt my sister." Grace's heart cracked. She looked around the room, at the drawings taped to the walls, hundreds of them. A man and a little girl, always together, always labeled Daddy and Clara. In one, the man was carrying the girl away from a burning car. In another, he was holding off shadowy figures with a flashlight. Walter had rewritten her entire life. He'd erased Grace and Garrett, replaced them with a story of tragedy and rescue. And Cora had believed it. For 3 years, she'd lived in this underground room, fed lies like meals, taught to fear the people who loved her most. Upstairs, police sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed through the cracks in the barn walls. Grace heard boots on the dirt floor, shouts, the crackle of radios. She wrapped her arms around Cora, holding her tight, even as her daughter struggled. "I'm not letting go," she whispered. "Not again. I don't care what he told you. I'm your mother, and I'm never letting you go." Garrett appeared, at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale, his shirt torn, but alive. When he saw Cora, he broke. He dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "My girl," he choked out. "My baby girl." Cora looked at him, then at Grace, confusion twisting her features. She didn't recognize him. She didn't remember his voice, his laugh, the way he used to toss her in the air and catch her when she was little. All she knew was the man who called himself Daddy, who was now being loaded onto a stretcher, screaming through the pain that he loved her, that he had saved her. At the hospital, things didn't get easier. Clara, as she kept insisting, refused to let Grace or Garrett near her. She clung to the teddy bear Walter had given her, the one with the faded blue bow. A child psychologist tried to talk to her, but every question about her real parents was met with silence or anger. "They're not my parents," she said, over and over. "Daddy is. He saved me from the accident." The drawings kept coming. Page after page of the same story. A car crash, a hero, a new life. The doctor said it would take time, that her mind had protected itself by accepting the lie, that breaking through could take months, even years. Grace sat by her bed every night, reading the same books Cora used to love, hoping something would spark a memory. But the girl just stared at the ceiling, lost in a world Walter had built. Meanwhile, the truth about Walter came out in pieces. Detective Morrison sat with him in the hospital, recording his confession. Walter didn't deny it. He spoke calmly, almost proudly, about how he'd planned it for months, how he'd built the hidden room under the barn, soundproofed it, rigged a ventilation system so no one would hear. He knew the girls' routine, knew they trusted him. On that morning, he'd pulled up to the egg stand, smiled, said he forgot his wallet, asked if they'd ride with him to get paid. They climbed in without a second thought. They were so sweet, he said, his voice breaking. Nora was talking about school. Cora had her doll. Once in the barn, he told them their parents were gone, that there'd been an accident, that he was all they had left. And slowly, over time, they believed him. When Nora got sick 2 years later, Walter didn't take her to a doctor. He was too afraid. He tried to treat her with vet medicine, fever reducers, old remedies, but she got worse. And when she died, he froze. He put her in the freezer at first, not knowing what else to do. Then, weeks later, he took one of the old milk cans from the Whitfield farm, something he'd stolen during a night visit, did the unthinkable. He made her fit. Then he waited for spring floods to carry the can into Cedar Creek, hoping it would point suspicion at the parents. The can came from their farm, he said. People would assume they did it. They almost did. Back at the farmhouse, the weight of it all settled like dust. The media had moved on, but the whispers in town hadn't. Some people still looked at Grace and Garrett sideways, wondering if they'd known something, if they'd covered something up. The funeral for Nora was quiet, just family and a few close friends. They buried an empty casket, because there was almost nothing left to bury. Grace held Cora's hand the whole time, but her daughter didn't cry. She just stared at the ground, like she was somewhere else. One night, weeks later, Grace found a new drawing on Cora's nightstand. It was different from the others. Daddy, no accident. Just a farmhouse, a garden, and two figures, a woman and a little girl, holding hands. At the bottom, in shaky letters, it said, "Me and Mommy." Grace's breath caught. She didn't say anything, just folded the paper gently and tucked it into her pocket. That night, she sat by Cora's bed until she fell asleep. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, her daughter was coming back. The hospital hallway felt too bright, too loud, even though it was nearly midnight. Grace sat slumped in a plastic chair outside Cora's room, her fingers wrapped tightly around a cold cup of coffee no one had touched. Garrett stood by the window, staring out at the flashing lights still scattered across the parking lot, police cars, news vans, even a satellite truck from a national network. The world knew now. The whole country would soon be talking about the girls who vanished from a quiet Iowa farm, the parents accused of unthinkable crimes, and the neighbor no one ever suspected. But inside that room, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the girl in the hospital bed, curled up with a teddy bear that wasn't hers, calling herself Clara, flinching when Grace reached for her hand. The doctors said she was physically okay, no signs of abuse, no malnutrition. But the damage wasn't on the outside. It was in her mind, in the stories she'd been told every single day for 3 years. That her parents were dead, that Walter had saved her, that the world was dangerous, and only he could keep her safe. And now, suddenly, everything had flipped. The man she loved was in jail. The strangers who said they were her real parents were now supposed to be trusted. It was too much. Grace could see it in her daughter's eyes: confusion, fear, and something worse, betrayal, like she was the one who had taken Clara away from safety. The next few days passed in a blur. Funerals were planned. Nora's would be small, private, just family and the few who had never stopped believing in them. The casket would be closed. No one should see a child that way. The media camped outside the hospital, but Grace refused to speak. What could she say? That her daughter had been taken by the man who brought them pie every Thanksgiving. That he'd hidden her in a room under his barn while they searched fields and forests, cried at church, screamed into the night. That he'd rewritten her daughter's mind like it was nothing more than a notebook to be erased and filled again. Then came the moment no one expected. It was late afternoon on the third day. Grace had been sitting quietly beside Cora's bed, reading a story from one of the old books they used to love. She didn't expect her to remember, but she kept trying. When she finished, she looked up and saw it, a single tear rolling down Cora's cheek. Not a sob, not a cry, just a tear. And then, In a voice so quiet it barely carried across the room, Cora whispered, "I remember the speckled hen." Grace froze. Her breath caught. "Freckles?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cora didn't answer right away. She just stared at the wall, like she was searching through fog. "She used to lay blue eggs," she said slowly, "and you said they were magic." Grace broke. She dropped the book, leaned forward, and gently took her daughter's hand. "Yes, baby. Yes, I did, and you believed me." Cora looked at her, then not with fear, not with suspicion, but with something fragile, something like recognition. "You used to sing to me," she said, "when I couldn't sleep." Grace nodded, tears streaming. "I did, every night." That night, the child psychologist came in with a stack of Cora's drawings, hundreds of them, collected from Walter's hidden room. Most were of Daddy and Clara, but one, tucked in the middle, was different. It showed a farmhouse, a garden, and two women's, Grace and Cora, picking tomatoes. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, it said, "Me and Mommy." Before the accident, Dr. Marsh said it was a breakthrough, a memory fighting its way back through the lies. It wouldn't be fast. There would be setbacks. There would be nights when Cora screamed for Walter, when she begged to go home to the barn. But she was starting to remember, and that was enough. But Walter never made it to trial. A week after the arrest, he was found unresponsive in his jail cell. Not suicide, his heart gave out, the doctor said. Too much stress, too many years of carrying a secret that had eaten him alive. When Grace heard the news, she didn't feel relief. She didn't feel anger, she just felt empty. The man who took 3 years of their lives, who killed one daughter and stole the mind of another, was gone. And all she could think about was that he had loved Cora in his own twisted way. That he had fed her, taught her, tucked her in at night. But love isn't just care, it's truth. And he had stolen that from her. At Nora's funeral, Cora stood between Grace and Garrett, holding both their hands. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, but she was there. And when the pastor said, "We gather today not just to mourn a child, but to honor the truth that love never gives up," Cora leaned into Grace's side, just slightly. It wasn't much, but after 3 years of silence, of not knowing, of being treated like monsters, it felt like a miracle. Months later, life on the farm was different, slower, quieter. The egg stand was still there, but now Cora helped run it. Some days she called Grace Mom. Some days she didn't. Some days she drew pictures of butterflies and flowers. Other days she drew the barn, the hidden door, a man in a hat. They didn't stop her. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about making space for the pain, the truth, and slowly, carefully, rebuilding. People still talk about what happened on that farm, about the magnet fisher who pulled a milk can from the creek, about the parents who were blamed, about the neighbor who seemed too kind to be a monster. But the real story isn't about crime or mystery. It's about a family who refused to stop loving, even when the world turned against them. It's about a little girl who forgot who she was, but is learning again. And it's a reminder that evil doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes, it smiles at you across the fence line, waves on Sundays, and says, "Let me help." If you ever wonder how something like this could happen, remember this: the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in kindness, and the strongest love is the one that stays, even when everything else is gone.